Muy bienvenidos a nuestro canal Agenda Encubierta. Martín Loureiro, quien les habla, Mr. Pool en la producción. Y bueno, como estamos con el tema de las conferencias de desclasificación, como hablamos anteriormente sobre Luis Elizondo y su testimonio en el Congreso de Estados Unidos, donde fue una noticia global, queríamos mostrarles una audiencia de desclasificación muy interesante ocurrida en 2013 en el National Press Club en Washington, D.C., Como pueden ver, es un tremendo edificio clavado en la capital del imperio. Es una organización de profesionales y periodistas más importantes a nivel mundial. Agrupa a periodistas, funcionarios gubernamentales de comunicación y otras figuras relevantes en el ámbito de la información. De hecho, desde su fundación en 1908, la mayoría de los presidentes de Estados Unidos han visitado este club y todos desde Warren Harding, 29º presidente de los Estados Unidos, han sido miembros. Lo que les quiero decir es lo imponente que es esta organización, ¿sí? Bueno, en este lugar se realizó desde el 29 de abril al 3 de mayo de 2013 la Audiencia Ciudadana, o como podemos ver en inglés, The National Hearing, sobre divulgación de ovnis, donde se presentaron a declarar varias figuras gubernamentales, políticas, militares y diplomáticos de alto nivel, mostrando pruebas convincentes que apuntaban hacia una presencia alienígena en nuestro planeta, interactuando con la humanidad. El objetivo de este acontecimiento, sin precedentes en el National Club, era mostrar lo que el Congreso de Estados Unidos había pasado por alto durante 45 años, esta cuestión. Bueno, uno de sus oradores fue Paul Hellyer, que fue ministro de defensa canadiense entre 1963 al 67 y del 67 al 69 ministro de transporte. Vamos a ver un resumen de lo que declaró Hellyer y después vamos con el análisis, ¿sí? Pido disculpas porque los subtítulos son generados por YouTube y algunas frases no se leen bien, pero en general se puede leer bien.
Let's go to our esteemed Honorable Paul Hellyer of Canada. We would give you 20 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. And thank you, Steve, for the invitation. My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defense for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23 and a half years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defense, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accept the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort, Mike Bird, to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian, and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoire, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers. And I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin. But after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with him. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival. The world is an unholy mess. We have at best until the end of this decade. In my book, I said we have 10 years to stop global warming if we don't want it to be beyond the point of no return. 2 years has gone past since it was written, so I say we have until the end of the decade to arrest global warming. Yet our leaders don't even talk about it very much except in a superficial way. They appear to be more interested in starting wars to control more oil and, in effect, prolong the gravity of the threat. Of course, even if they took the problem seriously, they wouldn't have the finances to finance the transition from oil to the clean economy, to clean energy, because we have an infinitely silly banking and financial system in the Western world. And the United States Congress, I regret to say, is partly responsible, and I'd be glad to elaborate on that later if you're interested. And finally, they need the technology for clean energy. And it exists, and it's being kept secret by the same vested interests who control our destiny. Who are these vested interests, and what are they up to? Well, Senator, you were talking about a military junta. In my opinion, that is true, but I have broadened and deepened the definition to cabal, and the cabal comprises members of the Three Sisters: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The Council on Foreign Relations is the oldest of the Three Sisters, and as early as October 1940, years before Germany surrendered to the Allied armies and to vaporize Hitler's vision of empire, the Council's Economic and Financial Group drafted a memorandum outlining a comprehensive policy, quote, to set forth the political, military, territorial, and economic requirements of the United States in its potential leadership of the non-German world, including the United Kingdom itself, as well as the Western Hemisphere and the Far East. The Council made absolutely no effort to disguise, where's that? Right next to PL. The Council made no effort to disguise the fact that the purpose of the Grand Area and later world hegemony was to support an expanding U.S. economy, to provide it with raw materials and markets for its products. This was labeled the national interest, quote unquote. It was equally clear that the national interest was the interest of the ruling elite, whose members comprised the council. The real interests of the majority of rank-and-file Americans was never a factor in the equation. So, Mr. David Rockefeller, who was a member of all three of the sisters, is quoted as saying this at a meeting of the Bilderbergers in Europe. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. He, of course, pretended he didn't say that, but the witness this is reported by Daniel Estulin, a thoroughly reliable reporter who has written the true story of the Bilderberger Group. And if you want to really get inside of what's been going on there for this long time, that's a good place to go. So anyway, you hear what Mr. Rockefeller said, and so there you have it. The aim of the game is a world government comprising members of the cabal who are elected by no one and accountable to no one. And according to Mr. Rockefeller, the plan is well advanced. Does this help you to understand why our civil rights are being taken away from us? I say us, because Canada too is included in the grand plan. A giant leap in the wrong direction followed the end of the Cold War.
Bueno, ahí lo vieron a Paul Hellyer. Vamos a poner el link en el pie del video de toda su conferencia. Acá fue solo la mitad, pero impresionante. Cómo tiró todo su currículum. Al principio, sin duda, un diplomático con carrera, que dijo de todo en el influyente National Club, donde no expone cualquier persona. Si voy yo, obviamente que me dicen que me retire, sino personalidades que sí poseen credenciales oficiales respetadas a nivel global, como las que posee Paul Hellyer, ¿sí? Bueno, muy fuerte lo que dijo, que hay por lo menos 2 razas alienígenas trabajando para el gobierno de Estados Unidos. Suena todo muy parecido al caso de Gary McKinnon, que fue un hacker británico que se infiltró en las computadoras de la NASA por más de 2 años, allá por 1992, y descubrió una lista de agentes no humanos que eran parte del gobierno. Una locura demencial todo. El caso es que a McKinnon lo descubrieron y la justicia de Estados Unidos pidió su extradición, pero Inglaterra nunca lo extraditó, por suerte para su fortuna, ¿sí? Un día vamos a hacer un programa sobre McKinnon, que es impresionante su historia. Pero volviendo a Hellyer, es tremendo como habla sobre la familia Rockefeller, familia bien conocida en las altas esferas del poder, y como era partícipe de un gobierno oculto que no es elegido por nadie. Ahí es cuando afirmamos en este canal la importancia de lo poderoso que es Majestic 12 y en lo que se transformó, dominando a presidentes desde Kennedy hasta hoy. La verdad que suena todo también a muy hombres de negro, la película, ¿no? Pero bueno, queríamos dejarles este video que nos pareció muy interesante para analizar y pensar. Les recomiendo que lo vean porque es asombroso lo que afirma Hellyer. Y con esto concluimos el informativo de hoy. Desde este humilde canal les mandamos un gran saludo y nos estamos viendo.